Lance was my brother-in-law, but he was more than that. He was a go-to kind of guy. He was someone you'd go to when you needed something. When my daughter Rachel was in high school, we had a blazer for her that was kept together with string and Elmer's glue, and it was constantly having issues, and my wife Karen said, go to Lance, and Lance would put it back on the road, or every year when a missions time came around, go to Lance, make sure it passes. And my son James, when he was a Cub Scout in the Pinewood Derby, James wanted to do something a little bit different, which he still does, want to do things differently, and he didn't want to carve the Pinewood race car. He wanted it to look like a Mustang. So we went to the store, bought a Mustang model, and of course it didn't fit, and my wife Karen says, go to Lance. And it did not win, but it got a prize for being the most unique. And even myself, when I needed product shots for a brochure, I'd go to Lance for photography, or even recently, he shot some drone shots for me. He was always the go-to guy, but he had a bigger ministry than that. He was a go-to guy when he would go to the prisons, and sometimes he would be the only light in many of these men's whole reality is when he would show up. And many years ago, I lived in New York, and there was a famous rock star who died, and I went to his service, and there were thousands and thousands of people there, and they talked about his legacy and what a legacy he was leaving. And all these years later, I look back and I think about the kind of legacy that you want to leave. And Lance had a different kind of legacy. He had an eternal legacy that he left. And so Jan asked me to write a song, and I've tried to put those elements into this song. Lance's ministry was called Church Behind the Walls being the prisons that he visited. And so the name of this song is The Chaplain of the Church Behind the Walls. There was once a hopeless prisoner living in a Georgia cell. He'd been tried and convicted of his crime, abandoned by his family and society as well. He knew he'd be there till the end of time. But then the prisoner heard a message from a man with words of hope and an everlasting plan. A socket, wrench, and camera were the tools of that man's trade, but his Bible was the greatest tool of all. Most important was the great eternal difference that he made as the chaplain of the church behind the walls. Now most every man behind the bars will claim his innocence, like that prisoner in another Georgia jail. But this one was wrongly convicted by a judge in a weak defense, and his bitterness grew like a cancer cell. But then
message from a man, with words of hope and an everlasting plan. A socket, ridge, and camera were the tools of that man's trade, but his Bible was the greatest tool of all. Most important was the great eternal difference that he made. As the chaplain of the church behind the walls, now most men want to leave behind some sort of legacy. Some leave their fortune, some their fame, but what will last throughout eternity is what is left in Jesus' name, in Jesus' name. Now for those men, their walls are gone, along with sorrow, guilt, and pain. For they were told they had a choice, and the decision that they made broke their shackles and their chains. And today, the chaplain and the prisoners all rejoice, because he heard a message from a man, words of hope and an everlasting plan. A socket, ridge, and camera were the tools of that man's trade, but his Bible was the greatest tool of all. And most important was the grand eternal difference that he made. As the chaplain of the church behind the walls, the chaplain of the church behind the walls, he was the chaplain of the church behind the walls.